Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Behold podcast on the Genre Equality channel. My name is Hitzir.
Isa.
This month, well, this week actually, this is the last Behold of the year.
Yes, it is.
We are wrapping it off much like we wrapped up last year with the best films from the second half of 2022.
Mm.
Why just the second half? Because we already covered the best films from the first half of 2022 earlier on in June. So scroll back to our archives, back to the June section.
Mm-hmm.
Check out our best films from the first half of 2022 over there. We got a bunch of goodies, including the worst person in the world and so on. So if your favorites are not on this list right now, maybe it's because they were back in our first list from the first half of 2022.
Yeah.
We're just here to cover the films that, okay, here's the disclaimer, that came out in Singapore from July to December.
Yeah.
So we're functioning as Singaporeans. We live in Singapore, if you didn't know. We're functioning according to the Singaporean film schedule. So most of these films appear in Singapore either on VOD, streaming, Blu-ray, or cinemas July onwards.
Mm-hmm.
So which is why this is the way it is. So these are the best, the four highlights from the second half of 2022.
Yeah.
But beyond that, after we are done highlighting all these great films from all over the world, we'll be breaking down our top 10 overall best films of 2022 right at the end. So stay
Mm-hmm.
tuned for that one because it covers the first half and the second half of the year. Oh, again, keep in mind, only covering movies that are available to us in Singapore via VOD, streaming, Blu-ray, or theatrical um, in this calendar year.
Yeah.
So there will be certain films that are getting a lot of attention right now, like The Fablemans or
Mm.
The Banshees of Inisherin
Yeah.
or Kate Blanchett's Stern in Tar
Mm-hmm.
that have not come to Singapore, and we have no way of accessing them. They were not in Singapore International Film Festival. They're not available on VOD just yet.
Yeah.
So if you want reviews of that one, if you wanted us to shout that one out, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you, man. We haven't seen them.
Yeah.
Not because we don't want to, but because we just don't have the availability to see
Mm-hmm.
them.
Yeah.
Which is why our list is a little bit more limited than some international lists out there. But hey, there's a wealth of great films down here, man.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here to talk about them all, particularly four straight out outstanding highlights from the second half of 2022. They include films from India,
Yeah.
such as RRR,
Mm-hmm.
a film from France called Happening, a film from the UK/Ireland called Aftersun, and a film from South Korea called Decision to Leave. Let's begin around South Asia, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's talk about RRR. Straight out of Hollywood, RRR is a bigger than life and bolder than mainstream action adventure epic.
Yeah.
And it has performed mightily, not just in domestic cinemas, but in international cinemas as well, as even American audiences marvel at its spectacle, its embrace of supercharged emotion, and sway to its propulsive music while being repeatedly gobsmacked by its
Oh man.
unfettered audacity. It is propelled by Telugu cinema's triumvirate of superstars,
Mm-hmm.
N.T. Rama Rao Jr. and Ramchandran, alongside the director S.S. Rajamouli, whose combined names are just one of the many reasons for the triple consonant title.
Yeah.
The movie is such an irresistible and intoxicating celebration of cinematic excess. It's maximalist in all the right way. That even after the 187 minutes have passed,
Mm-hmm.
including an intermission,
Mm-hmm.
or as the title card announces, interval, you are left exhilarated, not exhausted. Which, truth to tell, is hard to say
Yeah.
about some of the many comic book action adventure blockbusters that we've seen this year.
Yeah.
There've been multiple 2 hour, 3 hour plus movies from both the DCEU and the Marvel universes.
Mm-hmm.
Say your Black Panther, Wakanda Forever's, your the Batmans, which while they have garnered positive reviews here on Genre Equality, we had plenty of problems with them, didn't we?
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that pacing is not one of the issues here on RRR. It's such an It's such an adrenaline ride that it makes 3 hours feel like 30 minutes. Isa, you've seen RR over on Netflix,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. That's right.
So I think most of us in Singapore watch it over on Netflix. And one of the things that we have to talk about also is we have to clarify that we did not see the original Telugu version of RR, as
Oh,
most international audience have not.
yeah.
The Telugu version is very difficult to find online, and
Mhm.
that's the only way we here in Singapore have been able to watch the film. Sadly, I would have loved to see this on the big screen.
Yeah.
But we watched the Hindu dub version of it.
Mhm.
That's the only one that we could find. So this is the one that we're reviewing.
Mm.
So you caught it over in Netflix, the Hindu dub, I imagine.
Yes, that's right.
Could you give us a little synopsis about what RR is
Oh,
about,
man.
and what do you think of it when you first watched it?
Yeah, so I caught RR. I think Hits you put me onto this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
he was just telling me like how over the top, how kind of ridiculous, and how like memorable it is. And so I caught it actually much earlier this second half of the year,
Okay.
almost when like a week since it got on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is, I've been talking about RR to my friends and recommending it to my friends like up till 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's how kind of like impactful and lasting it is, as just like a a piece of cinema that stands out like almost head and shoulders above all the action slash superhero slash comic stuff that we've been getting recently,
Mm.
right? It takes all of that, dials it up to 11, and still
Yep.
manages to beat all of them at what they propose themselves to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So RR is a fictional imagining of two real life uh, Indian revolutionaries, I believe.
Yes,
Is my understanding of it.
very. The revolutionaries are very real. What happened in this movie is not very real, but
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
you're right.
So
Yeah.
the director basically, as he was kind of doing research about these two revolutionaries, Chandra and I only know the character names. What are the revolutionary names? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
let's see. Yeah. So Charan and Ramarao, right? Oh no, it's
Yep.
those are the actors, right? Played by
Yeah. Beam is one of them.
yeah, Beam and
The other one is
Raju.
Raju, right? Yep.
Yeah. So he recognized like a couple of like coincidentalness or like similarities between the two. And even though they never met
Mm.
in real life, he wanted to tell a story about the possible friendship they would have and how that would play out, right?
Yes.
I didn't manage to dig into much of the history of the actual people itself, but what we get is, oh man, a bromance of the ages
Yeah.
is the best way to do it. Full of secrets and possible betrayals and
Mm-hmm.
turns of um, character that are very hard to describe without actually watching it for yourself. Like
Absolutely.
it's simple in its premise, but the way that it plays out is often beyond description, or it's hard to. Oh man, it really is like difficult without, because it's packed with so much kind of visual spectacle with outstanding performances by both leading actors, where they capture the what if, right, of two men in Indian history who walked similar paths but just never had the ability or the reason to cross paths, right?
Absolutely. These are two Indian revolutionaries who absolutely do not subscribe to Gandhi's philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, Absolutely do not. They do not.
Yeah.
We did talk about like how this is so refreshing from the glut of superhero blockbusters out
Yeah.
there, right? And the two protagonists here are not supposed to be
No.
superheroes. But I mean, let's be real, they are, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kumaram Beam, who you're trying to talk about earlier,
Yes.
was this real life revolutionary leader and guerrilla fighter from the Gond tribe during the British
Hmm.
Raj. And Alluri Sitarama Raju, kind of renamed as Ram in the film, is similarly inclined insurgent
Mm.
who led his under-equipped followers during raids on police stations to acquire firearms. There is no record of these two men ever meeting in real life, but hey, when have filmmakers ever allowed facts
Yeah.
to get in the way of an exciting story?
Yeah.
There isn't also any record of them possessing any abilities like Captain America
No.
or their cunning and charisma, but Rajamouli does not let that bother him either.
Yeah.
In the 1920s, according to RRR, which also stands for Rise, Roar, Revolt, when the full title finally makes its appearance on screen,
Yeah.
Ram is a fiercely determined firebrand from Andhra Pradesh who goes undercover as a member of the British Army in the hope of arming his village compatriots. Early on, he demonstrates his mm, full loyalty to the crown
Yeah.
and more or less establishes his superhumanity by single-handedly
Mm.
punching, kicking, and beating and manhandling thousands of rioting protesters
Yeah.
to seize one fucking guy
Mm-hmm.
who tossed a rock at a portrait in a police outpost.
Yeah.
In most action movies, this sequence would be safely regarded as rousingly over the top, probably in the climax.
Yeah.
In RR, this was the subtlest, the least over the top, the smallest action sequence that this great movie can cover. This was nothing more than a curtain raiser.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're introduced to our other protagonist in the Adilabad forest, the working class heroic Beam, who has a mustache for the ages,
Yeah.
establish
yeah.
himself, establishes his own preternatural, supernatural bona fides, while wolf in order to lead the beast into a trap. Unfortunately, the wolf is taken out of the equation by a tiger who proceeds to chase Beam. Fortunately, Beam is more than a match for the big cat, and even when the trap doesn't quite work, Beam roars back at the tiger. If you are fortunate enough to see RRR in cinemas, which we did not,
Yeah.
as it was meant to be, the next roar you might have heard would be the cheering of an audience, which is something I really wanted to experience while watching this. And the fuse is lit for an explosive meeting of these exceptional men when the British governor Scott Buxton, played by Ray Stevenson, actually, and his crueler than cruel wife, Catherine, goes slumming in a gone village, accompanied, of course, by a contingent of army officers. Catherine proceeds to abduct a little girl, Mali, to amuse and entertain her as a plaything in their palatial Delhi home. This, of course, doesn't go well with the village or the mother,
Mm-hmm.
who hires sorry, who did they hire? Beam,
Yeah.
To get back their child, go into Delhi, get back their child. At this point, the scene of the abduction was so harrowing and brutal. You were probably tempted to shout rude things at the screen, but don't fear. Beam vows to journey to Delhi,
Yep.
and with the aid of his team
Yeah.
of a simpatico of locals, tries to retrieve Mali. And it doesn't take long for word of Beam's impending arrival to reach the British authorities, and it takes even less time for Ram in an effort to rise up the ranks in the British military, to infiltrate them. He volunteers to find and arrest the potential troublemaker. But fate, along with what I can only describe as a shamelessly contrived scenario by Rajamouli, tosses both men a curve when they see a boy trapped in the Delhi River while flaming railroad cars drop into the water around him.
Yeah.
Both men rush to a conveniently located bridge, Ram on horseback, Beam on a motorcycle,
Mm-hmm.
and improvise a rescue detailed in another jaw-dropping action sequence that will stun and gobsmack you. And they communicate wordlessly, stage a daring rescue. All these happens, everything I've described happens in the first act of the film.
Yeah.
And then the bromance happens in an extended musical sequence,
Yes.
which honestly, I would if RRR was a TV show, I would have watched a full one season of that bromance happening. And like,
Yeah.
they're training in the jungle, they're frolicking in the water, things like that. Every episode could be a different thing of them doing them going like wingmanning each other. It will be so good. And it would be unfair to spill more beans or spoil any fun by providing additional plot details or scene descriptions. Just wait. I mean, until You see what Beam does with a truckload of animals. Suffice to say that Beam and Ram develop a deep friendship without either knowing the other's true identity or grand
Mhm.
designs, and they greatly enjoy each other's company until they don't, and then they do again. There are two splendiferous, spirited song and dance
Yep.
sequences where the guys delight in their bromance, and they they play like fever dreams, like an action movie remake of Singing in the Rain. Particularly one of the best choreographed dance offs,
Yep.
I guess is the
Yeah.
word,
Yeah.
that you ever see on screen. Uh, oh boy. And I've only just described basically one third of the film.
Yeah.
What do you think about all this and how it propels to its second act and then eventually its grand third act, which puts everything else that came before to shame?
Oh man. Um. So lately, I've been recommending this to my friends who play D&D. Uh, and
Mm,
I explained it to it this way: like, if there's a film that captures kind of like the highs and lows and absurdities of playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? At a table that is like really, really fun and enjoyable. It's RRR, just because it's so over the top, but it never steps into the realm of melodramatic, if that makes sense, right?
I
And
see.
it's the twists and turns that the narrative kind of takes, in particular, like between the transitions or between the acts of the movie itself, right, is
Mm-hmm.
something that on the one hand you're like, yeah, of course that's gonna happen, but again, it's all in the execution and the unfolding of of
Mm,
of how they tell it that is you can't look away, right? Like it's much like the possible train wreck that was happening on screen, right? Like it doesn't feel like a train wreck, but you are in it for the ride from the get go, and every scene that appears after that just makes you kind of like further invested and immersed in a world that is so much larger than life, and even like your favorite comic book superhero adaptations
mm,
can barely hold a candle to.
mm,
It is tender in the moments that it's tender. It's loud in the moments that it's loud. Like, it leans in at every turn. For that, like their first
yep.
meeting, like no one should be able to hold eye contact across that distance. Right. No
Mm-hmm, yep.
one should be able to icon that distance. You're talking about the incident with the truck, which in and of itself feels like a feat to have to carouse that many animals for that particular feat. There's
Mm-hmm.
a small scene kind of like in the that has to do with a snake, and I'm not going to say anything more than that.
Great one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like so you have these like huge, larger than life like action set pieces that are moving and kinetic and absolutely mind blowing. But at the same time, there are these really small moments that you kind of like zoom in real deep into the characters themselves, their relationship with each other, with their
Mm,
significant others, as
yep.
well, and then you have to zoom all the way back out to get remember, oh, the bigger picture here, and the context that these two men are revolutionaries fighting for freedom for
Mm,
a country that they love, but the country that they love feels it is the same thing, but they love very different facets of that, right? And it's
mm,
through all those differences uh that they find common ground despite their
mm-hmm.
methodology, like the difference in their methodology,
Yeah,
really,
our philosophies
or
on life and
philosophy
stuff
or
like that.
religion
Yeah.
for that matter, right? Like how
Mm-hmm.
they negotiate that, while all this other stuff is happening in 3 hours is kind of a feat, right? Like it feels
Yep.
completely
Yep.
earned and not at all stretched. And it's so hard to make something this um, maximalist, and make an audience feel like they walked away getting all of that plus some,
Mm,
and,
yep.
and feel completely satisfied. It's
Mm-hmm.
mind blowing how this film makes you feel at the end of it. Right? It's not
Yep.
draining in any way. It's not a drag in any way. Like every one of the 3 hours and a little uh,
Mm-hmm.
is well served to you as
Mm-hmm.
an audience, and you feel better for it. I guess is the best way to kind of describe it.
Yes, you're right. The film is not a train wreck even during the scene with a train wreck
Yeah.
that could have been a train wreck,
Yeah.
I think Rama Rao Jr. is effective and empathy grabbing as
Mm.
this. He looks like a seemingly ordinary man, right?
Yeah.
But he achieves the extraordinary, evolving into an iconic hero.
Mhm.
He's great at action. He's great at dancing. He's even great at comedy, getting a few laughs, especially during Beam's stealthy romance with the British girl
Jenny.
played by Olivia
Yeah.
Morris, Jenny.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and better yet, better than anything, he has sensational chemistry with the more conventionally handsome Ram Charan.
Mm.
It may be overstating to suggest that Charan carries himself with the authority and assurance of a deity,
Yeah.
but I mean, I don't think so. I think he does. When he's not physically or emotionally anguished,
Yeah.
Ram Charan feels like a god. And when Ram, quote unquote, borrows a bow and arrow from the statue of Lord Rama, it seems less an act of
Yeah.
sacrilege than a simple professional courtesy, one god lending his weapon to another god, you
Yeah.
know. Something that struck me during this film was that I think there are a lot of echoes of another quite famous Asian action filmmaker who wasn't bound by physics or logic and things like that.
Mm.
Um, Rajamouli reminds me a bit of John Woo, not stylistically, but
Yeah.
in how they approach their things. Also, in terms of themes of loyalty and betrayal and mutable identity that
Mm.
are kind of recurrently sounded. And they provide a powerful anchor of seriousness and mortal stakes during the most fantastical fights or flights or feats of daring do.
Mm.
And occasionally, your mind may tell you, this is absurd. Each time that happens, though, like your emotions, your heart will tell you, so what?
Yeah.
Give me more.
Yeah.
Who cares? We have described some absolutely ludicrous action set pieces that, in and of itself, like I said, could be the climax of any American action blockbuster.
Mhm.
But all these serve to set up one of the most. I almost want to spoil it,
Oh
but
man.
it's an action sequence where Ram sits on top of Beam, and they execute a prison break
Yeah.
into the forest that is, honestly, it blows everything else from the movie out of the water. Like, it makes everything else sounds like child's play, and that's insane. The escalation in this film
Mm.
absolutely escalates.
Yeah.
It never fails to not escalate. Rajamouli has recently announced RR2
Yes.
coming out in a couple of years. So my feeble brain does not understand how he can escalate from RR1, but let me tell you that I think he can do it because he has proven it over and over again through every minute of this film that he can escalate. He will always escalate.
Yeah.
The sky is the limit for what Ram Beam and Rajamouli can do, and
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's do it. Let's make this into a Fast and the Furious franchise. I want to see 9, 10 of these. Let's go. Yeah. Any final thoughts about RR before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, like, I would be more than happy to have such a long running franchise, right? Like, give me the sequels, give me the prequels, give me all of that because I'm here for it. Like, we laugh about comparing it to the Fast and the Furious just in terms of like the length of time that we want to see and like kind of the ridiculousness that they might possibly get up to. But this is so much better in so
Yep.
many ways, right? Like, it is. Oh man, I don't even know. Like, you will feel spoiled by this film. I feel when it comes to action set pieces, when it comes to this kind of, oh man, camp is not even the right word. I don't even know how to. Uh, Something that's willing to both take itself seriously and not seriously at all at the same time, right? That it has almost like comic book logic back to it, but like clearly it's not drawing from that.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah. I can't wait. We will definitely be watching the second one, and you guys can stay tuned, I guess. And hopefully, you go check R out if you haven't already. If you have and you love it, go and like tell your friends about it because it's an experience to share. And it's one of those experiences that's very hard to talk to other people about without people looking at you in disbelief.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want Ram and Beam to fight aliens? Because I do.
Yes.
Do you want them to time travel and fight other evil empires from history?
Yes,
I mean, I do.
absolutely.
Do you want to see a primal type movie where they fight
I was
dinosaurs
just gonna say that. Yeah.
or ride on dinosaurs?
Yeah.
Because I do. Um, if they were to announce any of such of these premises, people might laugh and be like, "What the fuck?"
Mm.
But I mean,
No, you.
do you really
Mm,
want it in your heart? Because I do also.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Like,
mean, let's just go. I'm down for whatever.
give this film a shot. Really, like we aren't kidding that any of the premises that he's just listed out is completely plausible in this universe of RRR.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep,
I'm
absolutely.
absolutely sold already.
Absolutely. It doesn't even have to be time travel. They could be just telling stories about their ancestors, right?
Yeah,
From back in the day.
yeah.
But still cast the same people.
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah, I would definitely be down with that.
Yeah, yeah. In the future, in the past, yeah. That was our it's available on Netflix. The Hindi version, have to clarify, is available on Netflix, not the Telugu version, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Let's move on to something a bit more serious, a bit more grounded.
Yeah.
Coming out of France is a film called Happening. And in the last few years, there have actually been a considerable amount of films like Happening,
Mm,
centered around the difficulties of getting an abortion.
yeah.
Uh, Understandably so, considering just how fragile the right to choose truly is,
Yeah.
as shown in recent events in America, for
Mhm.
example, where Roe versus Wade was just recently repealed.
Yeah.
Um, for example, we have Christian Mingiu's 2007 film 4 Months, 3 Weeks, and 2 Days that followed two Romanian students as they tried to find an illegal abortion.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, more recently, we also reviewed a great film from 2020 called Never Ready, Sometimes Always from
Mm,
Eliza Hittman that showed the journey of two friends in Pennsylvania going to New York City in order for the 17-year-old Autumn, the star of the film, to get an abortion.
yeah.
While these films focus on the absurd hurdles that I think women have to overcome in their right to choose, many of these films have also given these women someone, a partner, who acts as their support system
Mm,
and gives them aid in their most dire time of need.
yeah.
What makes Happening from director Andre Diwan such a difficult and heartbreaking watch in 2022 is how Diwan, the director, isolates the lead character of Anne, a woman in need of an abortion who cannot rely on the help of others. It's this type of solitude and the inherent horror that comes with having to undertake this action without any support. That is what makes Happening so effective and one of the most essential films made about abortion because not everyone is going to have a support system.
Mhm.
The film is set in 1963 France. Anne is a student who discovers that she's 3 weeks pregnant and becomes determined to terminate the pregnancy. She knows that if she is forced to have this child, her education will be over, her own life will become focused around this life that she doesn't want to bring to the world, and she will likely resent the child because of it. As her classmates mentioned, to become pregnant would mean that one's life would be over, and that's just not an option or an option for Anne, who wants to become, a scholar, who wants to study, who wants to do other things.
Mm,
Yet, despite Anne having close friends at school, she cannot reach out to them for help. They don't know that she's pregnant. And when she passingly, just very casually mentions abortion, they are taken aback by even the mention of it.
yeah.
Um, Anne's only option is an illegal abortion, which could send her to jail.
Mhm.
That is quite possibly the best case scenario.
Yeah.
The worst case scenario is that it kills her if she goes to the wrong doctor. D1 almost turns Anne's journey into a claustrophobic horror story where there is nowhere she can run to, nowhere she can find solace, and with basically a ticking time bomb, a clock ticking down before her options become even more limited. And this story is almost hauntingly quiet. Yet the terror that Anne is going through comes through in the actress's amazing performance. Her eyes show the fear and uncertainty that is under her calm, and she's calm and collected on the surface, but you can just see the fear underneath her,
Mhm.
knowing that if she shows the true feelings, it could put her life in danger. It could put her freedom in danger. Actress Vatu Leme is tremendous here, as is she is in every scene,
Mhm.
and we can see how the oppressive nature of the world and society around her is suffocating her in the future. That lack of a choice, and even the inability to open up and share the fears she has, and accept comfort from those closest to her. She's unable to do this. It makes this grim reality feels closer and more isolating than we like to consider. This is what makes it a bit more harrowing than something like 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days,
Mm,
or Never Ready, Sometimes Always.
yeah.
What about you, Isa? You've only recently caught the French film Happening.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
The Happening is a tough watch.
Mm.
Really is a tough watch. I mean, like you talked about it like being suffocating. Like the cinematography work is impeccable. It
Yep.
is tight. It is suffocating. It's claustrophobic, and all of that to highlight an amazing performance by our lead actress, Anna Paquin.
Mm.
Right, like it is unflinching in its examination of Anne's plight, right, and the way and you can't in such a very different way from RRR that you can't look away, right?
Mm.
Because it
Mm.
feels both wrong to look away but difficult to watch at the same time.
Mm.
The sense of isolation is not just a narrative reality; it is also a visual and oral feeling that you get, right? And it's incredibly visceral, right? Just because of the way that the sound design is done, just because of the way the cinematography is shot, even the way that they decide to light everything, right, with very okay, like the lighting is always almost ambient with only like beams coming through, and that repeats itself in across so many scenes.
Yep.
All of those things have the the feeling of an encroaching doom almost, right?
Mm.
That just hangs very heavily around all the way to the point that Anne's makes her decision, right? And
Yep.
it is, you're stuck in your seat for that, right? Like you don't want to look away,
Mm.
you don't want to, you don't want to leave, you don't want to stop, because you are immediately drawn into her world and how she feels,
Mm.
and like on top of the spectacular performance, on top of a very concise storytelling style, right?
Yep.
Like with all those things
Yep.
in the mix itself, it's hard to look away, even though it's so devastatingly and heart renderingly um
Mm-hmm.
uh such a heart rendering like emotional journey, but it
Mm.
does finally and eventually provide you with the emotional release that you are so desperately looking for in the way that everything unfolds in the end, right? And like,
Mm-hmm.
oh man, it is not only is it a vastly different film from some of the other abortion films that we've talked about,
Yep.
because of the isolation, because like our protagonist here, in the form of Anne, is alone, right? Its thematic treatment of it is far more terse in
Mm.
its allowances for levity and hope,
Mm.
right? Just the way that they examine it, and just how relentless and harrowing it feels at almost any given moment, really heightens your participation in as an audience in the film. You know, yeah.
Mm.
So
Yes.
it's a
Yes.
very, oh man, it's a very, it's a film that you sit in, if that makes sense, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It almost is almost like you're sitting in water that's beginning to boil, and that's what it feels like. And oh my god,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Would I watch it again? Probably not voluntarily, because it's a lot
Mm.
to kind of get through. I needed some time. I only watched this very recently. I needed a couple of days after that
Mm.
just to like process, I guess.
Mm.
It is thick with all the conflicting emotions that one would feel, and that comes across very clearly throughout the film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I mean, definitely. Um, I think Andre Dewan, the director, does a great job of balancing Anne's lack of choice
Hmm.
with a man in her life who make choices for her, choices that take away her autonomy and
Hmm.
choices that actively harm her.
Yeah.
Like for example, when a close friend, not a stranger, a friend discovers that she's pregnant, he tries to have sex with her since the worst possible outcome has already happened.
Yeah.
Duan also shows that Anne's various doctor visits uh, shows this through her various doctor visits about how their choices about Anne's body and takes the choices out of her own control. If anything, these doctors have harmed her
Mm.
worse than if she hadn't gone at all. They state that Anne is left. left with no choice,
Yeah.
or you have no choice. This all may come off as heavy-handed, except that D1 manages to make these moments work. And eerie examples of the times that I think various random men have power over her body that she does not.
Mm-hmm.
The world around Anne is full of options and opportunities, just not ones that she can be a part of,
Yeah.
thanks to that lack of choice. Through Anne's story, I think D1 is also exploring the absurdity of sexual inequality,
Mm-hmm.
not just in the 1960s, but in modern times as well. I think
Yeah.
they fear that finding the wrong man could ultimately lead to a choice that would, as previously mentioned, ruin their lives, whereas I think men are more allowed to be free with their sexual appetites.
Yeah.
And without having the freedom with one's own body, there can never be true equality, always leaving one side shamed for their
Mm-hmm.
choices, while the other side gets to have fun without the repercussions, pain, or ruined lives that the other side has to face. Unfortunately, I think happening comes at a time when it feels even more important and necessary than ever to uh, to talk about what's happening, for lack of a better term. And D1 has made a much needed film
Yeah.
that is quite essential
Mm-hmm.
for 2022, showing that this is a choice that this is a predicament that no person should have to face alone, and it's such a difficult one to handle. D1's reflective and quiet tone only highlights the dread of the situation and shows that restriction and taboos about such issues only makes this world a more cruel and terrifying place for people like Anne. With happening, I think Day One has crafted quite possibly the best horror story
Yeah.
of 2022, or the best horror film of 2022. Uh, Only because this is such a haunting and very real possibility for billions of people out there.
Yeah.
Not only is this a film, but the movie is all actually based on Offer Annie Ernaux's semi-autobiographical novel, a memoir of sorts.
Mm.
So the character of Anne is Annie, the author. She has taken her own real life experiences and translated it into a semi-autobiographical story.
Mm.
And it just goes to show how true something like this can be. And D1, I think, expresses the realism of it by not indulging in melodrama.
Yeah.
She takes a measured and minimalist approach to the story and immerses the audience in Anne's perspective,
Mm-hmm.
much like how Never Rarely Sometimes Always did as well.
Yeah.
And you're able to perceive a predicament in an almost mundane, practical way. Like Anne thinks of her situation on a very practical level. It's a personal thing, but it's a practical thing as well. All her life she's been praised by her parents and her professors for being driven.
Mm-hmm.
Why is her choice in this any different?
Yeah.
Why is her greatest asset becoming to feel like a flaw?
Mm.
Um, that's a good way to approach this film. And some of the scenes in here are way more horrific than I've seen in any actual horror film. So,
Yeah.
I mean, got to give it up to Andre D1, and of course the author of the book Annie Ernaux as well,
Mm.
for crafting uh, such a powerful tale. Any last thoughts about happening before we move on?
Um. Yeah. If you guys want to see something powerful,
Mm.
and painful, and unflinching in its very real and very visceral message.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, both Hits and I have said that it's a tough watch, right? It really is, but it is worth the
Mm.
time and emotional investment that you give to
Yep.
the film.
Yep. Definitely. Next up, we move on from France to the UK
Mm.
to talk about Aftersun, a sparkling debut by a filmmaker that ponders about a father-daughter relationship
Hmm.
and the mutable essence of memory. This is writer director Charlotte Wells's affecting debut film,
Hmm.
and After Sun plays out like a bit of a minor miracle in opinion, because I think the way it's written, the way it's structured, the way it's filmed,
Yeah.
probably should not have worked,
Yeah.
but it
Hmm.
does. The film is about fathers and daughters. It's about a daughter trying to understand her father from the distance of years. But it's also about memory and the way we remember events and how that deepens and changes through our lives.
Yeah.
It stars Paul Mescal, who plays the 31-year-old Callum, who has taken his 11-year-old daughter Sophie, played by Frankie Corio, on vacation to a resort in Turkey. Sophie is in the sweet spot between little girl and adolescent, and with her father, she's often still the little girl. But there is a group of teens at a resort that she's staying in that she's drawn to.
Mm.
She and a boy about the same age circle around each other. Meanwhile, Caleb is boyish and playful. There's an easy affection between the dad and the daughter.
Yeah.
He's not heavy handed, but he is protective and emotionally attuned to her. It's clear that he loves her fiercely
Mm-hmm.
and wants to open the world to her to give her experiences, but there's more going on. And this is a talent of Paul Mescal that we've talked about before
Yeah.
in normal people.
Mm-hmm.
His ability to kind of express undercurrents of struggle, of depression, of mental health issues through like micro expressions.
Mm.
And Sophie is only able to see that sparingly. She sees that he's struggling financially, and she sees that she's struggling emotionally, but she doesn't see how much.
Yeah.
Callum, or Paul Mescal as Callum, is great at portraying the hidden undercurrents of turmoil underneath everything. And not only that, we're seeing all of this Turkish vacation. We're seeing all this through the lens of memory,
Mm-hmm.
the lens of an adult daughter, Sophie, of the adult Sophie,
Yeah.
who is reflecting on her father about the vacation and the precious time that they had together, trying to get a handle on who her father was at this point in his life. But it's more complicated. The memories are hers, but from when she was a child, and now as an adult, about the same age as he was on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
She's looking at that time again, trying to get a more complete understanding of him.
Yeah.
We often, as children, do not come to the realization that our parents are also people.
Mm.
We only get to the realization when we get to the age when they had us. Like, how would we feel? How did he feel at that time? We finally understand them as true people.
Mm-hmm.
And Wells gives us the story of the vacation and Sophie's memories in an almost abstract way. I think one of the little miracles I was talking about is that there isn't a conventional narrative here.
No.
Instead, it comes at us in snippets, in vignettes, bits and pieces of what Sophie remembers from the vacation. There are short scenes, images, Polaroid pictures, some camcorder footage, slightly faded, slightly blurred. The film structure is meant to mimic the way that we remember things.
Yeah.
We don't fully remember events as if they were on film. Odd things stick with us. And on top of that, we are seeing are Sophie's impressions as an 11-year-old, things that aren't necessarily understood by a child. I think the business of making a film without a conventional narrative is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So, how does this all knit together so beautifully? That's the miraculous thing about what Wells has done with Aftersun. It's so thoughtfully put together.
Yeah.
Do you share the same sentiments as me, Isa?
Oh man. Okay, let's go one on one. First
Yep.
first off, right? Uh the performances here, right? We
Yeah,
already know
yeah.
how good Paul Mescal is. We've talked about it before, right? And it's exactly that. It's the micro expression of all that. But to have Paul Mescal and his very obvious acting ability matched by Frankie Corio is
The daughter, yeah.
kind of mind blowing, right?
Mm,
Like it is incredibly difficult, I think, to play a child um, that is like Sophie, right? Who is bright and bright eyed and perceptive at the same time. And at no point in time is that like, is that told to us. It's always shown, little
mm,
glances, the way she observes a lingering moment of observation, and all of those things. This is one of the most nuanced, subtle performances that I've seen in a while from a leading pair, right? And
yeah.
in the richness of that performance is where you
Mm-hmm.
unpick the relationship and unpack the dynamic between these this what seemingly seems like a very tender and affectionate father-daughter relationship, but it kind of means so much more, right? And because
Mm,
of the way that it is told, right, from older Sophie's point of view, we together with older Sophie are part of that unpacking process, uh, coupled with the film's desire for its sound design and for its cinematography to mimic the emotional um, the emotional, not triggers necessarily, but the emotional analog of memory recalling
Mm-hmm.
is it makes for such a magical uh, um, piece of film, right? Like that's like
Yes.
the simplest way I can describe watching this is that it feels magical. And I think that clearly shows later on when we rank all the films for the year. This
For sure, for
is
sure.
a special film,
Mm,
right? Like everything we're talking about, like all great films, but After Sun is special, and
mm,
it is astounding that this is the director's debut feature, right?
yep, yep.
Yeah, it's yeah, really, really. Um, it's tender and heartbreaking and relatable and universal in such a small way, right? Like its
Mm-hmm.
focus is so, its timeline is so narrow. It only takes place like during this holiday itself and the eventual kind of like Sophie's reflection on that.
Mm,
Its focus is it's laser focused on a particular part of life and a particular relationship, and yet the meaning and
mm,
the process of unpacking that with older Sophie feels so careful and detailed and tender, uh, but is tinged with this melancholy that feels at once familiar and immediate, right? And
mm,
all of
mm.
that to evoke that level of familiarity and of feeling is something that like it's hard to do in a film that doesn't have a conventional kind of like narrative structure, right?
Yep.
It's a bold move. It's risky, but every one of those decisions pays off in the right way uh, for this film. Like you walk away from this feeling as though you know, like um, Callum and Sophie feel like family friends, like people you've known all
Yep.
your life. And this is just like
Yep.
a week in their life that we are partaking of, you know. And
Mm.
it's crazy to be able to do that, right? In a film that
Yep.
is like an hour and 40 minutes long or something like that. Mind blowing.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely mind blowing.
I've often referred to filmmakers using non-linearity, like say Christopher Nolan, as sort of a gimmick,
Mm,
structural quirk that enhances their film.
yeah,
This non-linear structure is not a gimmick. It's
no,
done very purposefully to tell a very personal story about memory.
yeah,
And the film resists so much of what we usually see in a conventional film.
hmm,
There are no backstories, there are no explanations, there aren't even full scenes,
yeah,
and yet there isn't an absence of coherence or emotion in the film.
yeah,
It moves along gingerly, but the characters, the emotions, that sense of love quietly weaves us in and carries us through the movie. A big part of the success, as you mentioned, is the leads of the film, whose challenge was to create full characters that we could hold on to and that who we wanted to follow, even though we are watching them in small bites.
hmm,
The performances must both be casual and yet give us insight into the characters.
yeah,
And both Choreo and in her first role as young Sophie and Mescal as Callum breathe complexity into these characters without being explicit
hmm,
and by leaving details up to us to intuit.
yeah,
Really, this film leaves us a lot to intuit. Wells has given us a movie that has a tonal delicacy yet a deep emotional core.
mm,
It's a beautiful debut film.
mhm,
And in many ways, I think something like this could only come from a first time filmmaker.
yeah, yeah,
The audacity of it, the because she's not had the feedback, she's not had studio notes, this is just a very personal thing she wanted to do,
yeah,
and she employs all the filmography tricks to do it, and stuff that should not works here.
hmm,
It's done so well. um Cannot say enough about Paul Mescal once again.
yeah,
The way that he's able to be so subtle and abstract. There are scenes, when he's like sneaking a cigarette on the hotel balcony,
yeah,
or an ill-advised nighttime swim,
mm,
or in a poignant little sequence lying down on a carpet at a rug merchant's storeroom.
yeah,
And he seems to be straining under this cosmic weight and needing for a brief moment a kind of existential rest.
mm,
And he does it without overacting at all.
yeah,
It's all so micro, and man, Paul Mescal is amazing.
yeah,
Like, I've not seen him in too many things,
hmm,
but everything I've seen him in, he's just amazing. And the girl who plays Sophie is great at that too. Lah.
Yeah.
But these certain scenes, like Sophie being attracted to this boy, or wanting to hang out with other
Mhm.
kids, that really feel relatable to me, because when we are kids, we are so caught up in our own things
Yeah.
that we don't necessarily understand our parents' dilemma.
Mm.
Yeah. So I mean, that's great too, and the way that the film is able to, I don't know, imply that
Yeah.
Callum is dead, or that Callum has taken his own life
Uh.
without ever saying it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you are left with that impression.
Mhm.
I don't know how Wells does it, but the impression is there.
Yep.
And it's wonderful how it was written and filmed.
Mm.
Yeah, any last thoughts about Happening before we move on?
I think this is a must watch. Right. Like
Yep.
absolutely, well, recommend. It's on our list because it's things that we're recommending. But After Sun feels almost life changing, right? In
Mm.
terms of like films, you get special films that come out once in a while that not just uh evoke feelings in you, or not just like beautiful, not just have like moments, but like change a a a very important perspective in your life. And that for me this year is After Sun, like hands down,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I have been re-examining my own personal relationship with my memories of my loved ones after
Mm-hmm.
watching this, uh and I haven't stopped since. Like its impact is felt way longer than when the credits run. And yeah, like all good art, that's the way it should be, right? And yeah,
Yep.
yeah, easily After Sun is I have to say, if anything we've said interests you, um
Mm-hmm.
please go watch this. I promise you won't regret it.
Definitely. Next up, we're moving to South Korea to talk about Decision to Leave,
Yeah.
the latest film from Park Chan Wook. If you've not heard of Park Chan Wook, you must be living under a cave. He's the guy who did Old Boy, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy who did The Handmaiden,
Mm-hmm.
which, in my opinion, is a better version of Parasite. This is one of the greatest directors that have come out of South Korea, and that is saying something.
Yeah.
This is Park Chan Wook's latest film after a brief hiatus. And can I just say, nobody does convoluted storytelling like Park Chan Wook.
Oh my
You
god.
know, it's like Theseus himself would have given up watching, trying to write something like Old Boy,
Yeah.
or The Handmaiden.
Yeah.
He crafts this immaculately intricate labyrinths and pauses very occasionally to make sure that the laggards in the audience can keep up. The process should be maddening, but instead, as his new film proves, it's almost magical how his trail of elegance and glinting clues leads us out into the light again. And after, like I mentioned, the world-conquering success of films like Parasite, or small screen TV shows like Squid Game, Park Chan Wook's Decision to Leave has become the South Korean hit of 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on its deceptively clean surface, Decision to Leave is a story of a detective, a very quite typical neo noir detective you might find in a 1950s film, who falls obsessively in love with a suspect.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a bit of a unfair summary.
Yeah.
This is Park's first film since The Handmaiden, and the devil is in the details,
Mm-hmm.
and there are dizzying amounts of them. The South Korean director works at the top of his game once again and drops tantalizing clues that are best analyzed, I think, in multiple viewings, which it can be reported from first-hand experience, will be very helpful if you watch this more than once.
Yep.
His non-stop visual inventiveness stresses the longing that Detective Hee Jun, played by Park Hae Il, here taking his place amongst the great film noir detectives,
Mm-hmm.
or at least the
Well.
SEPs, the film noir detective SEPs, of which there are plenty.
Yes.
He feels for possible Black Widow Seo who is played by Tang Wei from Last Caution, you may remember.
Mm-hmm.
They show a simmering chemistry in this poignant and near inscrutable love story where the more Hee-jun learns about Seo the more mysterious she becomes, which has the viewer constantly questioning what they see and hear. Whether Seo murdered not one but two husbands
Mm-hmm.
is beside the point, while Park feels I think in a way, if this film feels both timeless and modern, because it feels like it could be, like I mentioned, one of those 1950s
Yeah.
noir films,
Mm-hmm.
and he uses her possible crimes to tell a story that is coolly restrained, yet kind of internally roiling with suppressed desire. I
Mhm.
haven't seen a film do suppressed desire this well in a long time.
Yeah.
And coolly restrained is usually not a phrase I would use to describe Park Chan Wook's work.
Yeah.
But here it is. It doesn't have the gonzo violence of Old Boy.
Hmm.
It doesn't have the eroticism of The Handmaiden.
Hmm.
And he replaces them with profoundly felt emotions that remain forever unexpressed through shifting visual points of view that keep us off balance. This is all really, really great. I didn't even describe the premise. Oh, the premise is Hee-jun is a detective.
Yes.
He is investigating the possible murder of a man's body who is found at the base of a nearby mountain. His prime suspect is the man's wife, a Chinese national who moved to Korea recently. He falls in love with her, and that is the beginning of the story. That's the summary of it, but it's so much more. You've only recently seen the Decision to Leave, right? You
Yeah.
didn't watch it in
No,
cinemas.
I didn't want.
So what do you think about this?
I had to watch this twice.
Yep.
I'm gonna say that the first time I watched it, I was deeply confused about certain things and very frustrated. At the point
Yep.
in time when I was like, "Oh my god, are we going through this again?"
Mm.
Yeah. So I'm not gonna spoil anything, but there is a moment in time where I went through all of that, right? But after I was done with my first view, I was like, no, something doesn't feel correct. Right? I feel like I'm missing a lot of details for this film to make sense as a
Mm-hmm.
work, right? So I went back and watched it again, and on second viewing, I totally agree with you. This requires more than one viewing. There are things
Mm.
that will be revealed to you that your mind needs time to process and only picks up the second time round.
Yep.
Yeah, it is so full of details
Mm.
that it is overwhelming when you start to recognize them, right? But at the same time, amidst the sea of these details, right, a very uh, nuanced performance of suppressed desire, of
Mm.
kind of like your the shifting the lines of what your identity is and what you attach your identity to uh, in a
Mm.
very convoluted, very strained, difficult romance, I guess.
It is a
It
romance.
is a
Yeah.
romance, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
but it never feels like the word romance doesn't necessarily come to mind while you're watching it, right?
Yes. Yes.
I think that is a lot more true to life than a lot of us care to admit. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, man, Decision to Leave is challenging to
Yeah.
watch, right? I think like what struck me first is that like Old Boy and Handmaiden had very different cinematography styles,
Mm.
right? But Decisions to Leave's very odd choices will
Mm.
stand out to you. And it's only on second watch that you kind of make sense why it works and why it makes
Mm.
you feel uncomfortable and why that's
Why he made the choice,
yeah,
lah.
why he
Yeah.
made the choice, why it makes you feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable, and why that choice makes complete sense in
Yep.
that particular moment as you are watching it. Um,
Mm.
it is it feels like so much more than just a puzzle to unpack.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there were times, especially on second watch, that it flitters between like a mood board
Mm.
to kind of like a tonal piece, but at the same time your mind is working on a totally different level from how you're feeling, right? Your mind is
Of
trying to
course.
unpack everything at the same time. So
Yep.
this is to leave is a ride. um
Mm.
it's a ride. I think this was the one that I watched the most recently, just last week.
Mm.
And I don't know if I've quite processed all of that. Like, I'm not sure how I feel
Same.
about the ending. You know,
Yep.
after two watches, I still don't know how to feel about the ending. Right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
a bad thing. It's just that
Yep.
haven't made up my mind whether I like it or
Mm.
not. Is it even important if I like it or not? Right?
Yeah.
It posits an interesting question that you have to uncover for yourself what that question is and never gives you answers. And I
Mm.
think that to me is what I've realized over the week of kind of like mulling over this. That's where the frustration of watching this film comes from, right? But again, like so many of the films that we've talked about for the second half of the year, like that in it of itself is a powerful
Mm.
powerful part of art, right? Um,
Yep.
yeah, and I think like where eventually as we discuss the films for the year and where that kind of ranks for me personally will reflect the fact that I don't think I've had enough time with this film, or maybe I need to watch it one more time. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to give it some breathing space before I explore that. Just
Absolutely.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, there are parts of this film that I I question. There are parts of it that I
Mm.
love. There are parts of it that still make me feel uncomfortable, right? And it's a whole bunch of things at the same time in looking at a very odd pairing
Mm.
that share an understanding while not understanding each other at all.
Yep.
Yeah, and within that kind of like small cosmos or microcosm of like the human condition, right? When it comes to love, it is everything in within the film, but barely scratches the surface.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
this is yeah,
Definitely.
Decision to Leave is something like
Uh, Decision to Leave, you're right, is actually essentially a love story.
mm-hmm.
And it's also a deeply sexy one,
Mm,
despite there being not a single sex scene.
mm,
In fact, Hyojun and Seore barely so much as touch each other.
yeah,
There is one moment where they rifle through each other's pockets or they apply lotion on their calloused
yeah,
hands. Instead, their soulmate style bond is complicated naturally when Seore's alibi turns out to not be as solid as it first appeared.
yeah,
And it is evoked by two actors' innately believable natural chemistry
mm-hmm.
and the choreography of certain scenes whereby their gestures and movements sync up. Uh, it's almost as if that their bodies have always known each other despite them
Mm,
not even touching each other.
yeah,
This harmony continues throughout, through even a change of location. The action in the second half of the movie moves to Ipoh. I won't reveal why, but there is a change of hairstyle and a change of husband for Seore.
mm,
And that chemistry is present from their first row conversation in a police interrogation room when, after a very expensive high-end sushi
oh
lunch,
my god,
much to the detective's partner's annoyance,
yeah,
they wordlessly clean up the table with the practice efficiency of a long married couple. It's almost as if they've done this before.
yeah,
And it's far from the only time that the staging of a scene is more loaded with meaning
mm-hmm.
than the words spoken.
Mm,
I think that scene is kind of the microcosm of what Decision to Leave is.
yes, absolutely,
Like, so much is said through staging than actual written dialogue,
yeah.
and I think that's great too. Lah. The director Park Chan Wook finds heights of expressivity without being show offy.
Mm.
This is a complex and challenging film,
Yep.
and perhaps not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say give this one a shot, especially if you're a Park Chan Wook fan,
Yeah.
because it retains his quite trademark convolutedness.
Yeah.
But whereas his previous films have been, shall we say, plot driven,
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, where it's essentially story driven lah. Like Old Boy is, The
Yep.
Handmaiden is,
Yep.
because of all the twists and turns.
Mm-hmm.
This one has similar plot driven sensibilities, but it is mostly actually character driven.
Yeah.
And I haven't really quite seen Park Chan Wook favor the characterness of the script over the plotness of the script,
Yeah.
and that makes it interesting to me. Is it as fun of a murder mystery as Glass Onion is? No. Glass Onion may be pound for pound the most fun murder mystery you've ever seen in your life, but
Mm-hmm.
this one is the most artistic murder mystery you'll ever see.
Yeah.
And that's great too. Okay, any final thoughts before we move on to our top 10 overall?
Yeah. If you watched Decision to Leave, highly recommend you
Mm.
give it another shot.
Yep.
Yeah. And this was a conversation I just had this morning while I was discussing a film with a friend who didn't quite like it.
Mm.
Like they were felt frustrated and they felt a little turned off about the film itself, right? And I was just sharing like I felt the same way and I had to watch it a second time and I sort of changed my mind, I think. And
Mm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a good indication that, like, if I ever finally kind of unpack what this actually is, that there's something a lot deeper than my initial just kind of like um first run through. So yeah.
Definitely.
Mm.
Okay. Now we're moving on to our top 10 films
Hmm.
of 2022 overall.
Yeah.
Let's begin with you, Isa. What's your number 10?
My number 10 is the recently available on Netflix, Del Toro's Pinocchio.
Yep.
Yes.
This will actually come up higher in my list, so
Mhm.
I guess we'll discuss it then briefly.
Yeah.
But we won't discuss this too much because there's actually a full review coming out on the next episode of Genre Equality. So
Exactly. Yep.
I will wait for that. My number 10 is one of two Iranian films on my list.
Hmm.
This one is called No Bears. It's written and directed by Jafar Panahi.
Hmm.
Um, it follows, much like all his films, the lead character is a director named Jafar Panahi. This fictionalized version of Jafar Panahi has moved to a rural village to remotely oversee filming of his latest film in a nearby town over the border. In this film, uh, I'm not talking about the film Woman film. I'm talking about the film,
Yeah.
No Best. Parallel stories unfold across the situations as desires, those between partners for a future or to craft art, are suppressed by larger forces of social and political authority. While naturalistic in style, No Bears blurs the bounds of documentary and fiction, deftly playing and eluding narrative anticipation. Its framing is shaped by the conditions of the Iranian state repression that Panahi and other filmmakers face. This reality of his intertwines with the worlds of other characters that he is viewing.
Hmm.
It throws loyalties and hierarchies and truths into questions amid contentions of criminality and liberty. This is a great film about a filmmaker who is essentially running from the law, who is about to be imprisoned by Iranian's cultural or morality police, uh, looking to make one last film uh, in a rural town near a border. Does he want to run? Does he just want to make a last piece of art? This film is made even more poignant because the director Jafar Panahi himself, after making this film, also in a rural town near the Turkish border, was arrested in Iran. He is
Oh.
in real life in prison right now, as are many actors and directors in Iran as well.
Hmm.
So this lends the film an extra level of authenticity. The fact that Jafar Panahi, the fictional version, and Jafar Panahi, the real version, face the same circumstances. The fictional version of Jafar Panahi is able to drive home safely here.
Hmm.
The real version was not. And yeah, that lends it an added layer like of authenticity that made No Bears so powerful. Which is why I put this at number 10 on my list. What is your number 9, Isa?
My number 9, and we just talked about this earlier in the episode, is RRR. For the main reason is like,
Yes.
uh, its very existence means you can't ignore it, right? It's that kind of
Yep.
film, and I'm still talking about it like many months later and telling people you need to watch this.
Mm-hmm.
Just because like I want you to share in this very strange, specific experience of having watched RRR and trying to explain that to people who haven't.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Your number 9 is
Um.
my number 9
Yes.
is Pinocchio, which
Mm,
was your number 10.
yeah.
Two major Pinocchio films came out this year.
Hmm.
I reviewed Disney's live action remake of
Yeah.
the classic cartoon. It
Yeah.
was feeble.
Hmm.
Guillermo del Toro's heart rendering version instead was a revelation. He sets his stop motion masterpiece in fascist Italy, complete with a cameo appearance by Mussolini, and fills it with death and darkness. It almost feels like a spiritual sequel or a spiritual cousin
Yep.
to The Devil's Backbone or Pan's Labyrinth.
Hmm.
But it's also a rollicking delight with rousing songs and gorgeous stop motion animation and an endearingly pompous cricket voiced by Ewan McGregor. Guillermo del Toro sprinkles his signature dark whimsy on a fairy tale classic that's filled with heart, humor, and this time historical grounding.
Mm.
I think it's a phenomenal feat of animated cinema.
Yeah.
What about you?
Oh man, I love the fact that he decided to ground the fairy tale, right,
Yep.
in a real world setting, and and ask the logical questions surrounding what the fairy tale would be, right? Like the
Mm.
Disney version follows that beat for beat, right? Like the one that we all remember, the animation one,
Yep.
from back in the day, and they just tried to like recreate that by live action, right?
Yep.
Del Toro's reimagining of this tale, because it is grounded in a time and place that we can pinpoint to, has the ability to also logically ask the questions that would
Mm.
naturally occur if a fairy tale happened in like our reality, like in real life, right?
Mm.
Like, what
Mhm.
would happen if a wooden boy came to life in a town that is, is going to be Catholic in nature or Christian in nature, right? Like, how
Mhm.
would the villagers respond? How would it seem
Mm.
to, the local priests and all of that? Like,
Yep.
all of those questions suddenly come to light, and they are raised in such a natural way and also dealt with in a logical way as well. I mean, most of the time anyway, the story still needs to move forward, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, and every time that happens, I smile a bit wider,
Mm.
right? Just because
Yep.
like it's full of whimsy, it's full of fancy. It loses none of that, but there is a maturity to Del Toro's version that the Disney version, old or new, does not have,
Mm.
right?
Absolutely. Yep.
And like I cannot imagine the amount of work that went into the stop motion. It is
Mm.
detailed and smooth. There is nothing in the medium they have chosen to use for the animation that has prevented them from exploring anything they want, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's the dance sequences, whether it's the action set pieces, whatever it is, like it's such great attention to detail and dedication to that particular form of storytelling that is, as many of us know, incredibly time consuming and hard to do, right?
Definitely.
That
Yes.
there's an artistry and craftsmanship to that you continually see throughout the entire movie. That is, it's a marvel, right? It felt a
Mm.
lot like watching oh no, what's the remake? Not the remake, the prequel to Jim Henson. Uh,
The Dark Crystal.
yeah, Dark Crystal, right? Like it had that same effect. It evoked the same feeling of like, wow, really? Like
Yep.
how?
Yep.
Right? Like,
Yep.
and it's so easy to like, oh, your mind would just tell you because we're so used to it. Oh yeah, it's just all digital, right? But not all of it
Mm.
is, right? And there is a human touch to it that is very distinct and very recognizable, that you feel the organicness of it, right? That just
Mm.
adds a very meta layer to a story about an inorganic boy wanting to be an organic boy. Well, no, wood is organic. Yeah, you get what I
Yes.
mean, right? Like, is
Yeah.
essentially it
Yeah.
speaks to the materiality of the story as well as the medium that they've chosen to tell it in. Yeah, so I loved it.
Definitely.
I loved it. Like it felt like a fairy tale retelling of one of my favorite stories told specifically for me as a grown adult, and I love it because
Mm.
of that.
Agreed. Your number eight is also a film that I really, really liked. It barely missed out on my top 10.
Oh, nice.
What is your number eight, Isa?
My number eight is Parallel Mothers. We had a
Yep.
very in-depth discussion of this particular film in our Behold
Hmm.
episode focused on Pedro Almodovar. Uh,
Yes,
Parallel Mothers is
correct.
his most recent film, I believe,
Yep.
unless he's released something since then.
He's
Um,
released a short film, but this is his most recent feature film, I guess.
yeah, so Parallel Mothers is a story that's set
Yep.
in kind of like the long aftermath of Spain's civil war,
Mm.
and once again featuring his constant and eternal muse Penelope Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, she plays a new mom caught in a case of mistaken identity in the maternity ward.
Yep.
uh like Parallel Mothers focuses on kind of like generational divides,
Mm.
focuses on like the language of mothers from one to another, single mothers specifically. um it is it is an exploration of motherly love and the challenges that comes with it, uh set against not a backdrop, set against a scene of what
Mm.
uh, Almodovar's classic, almost like telenovela, over the top,
Yep. Melodrama. Yeah.
melodramatic style, right? And it
Yep.
was one of the most memorable pieces of film for me this year.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I loved it. You want to hear more about it and us to kind of dive really deep into both Parallel Mothers and director Pedro Almodovar, please go ahead and
Yeah.
check out our Behold episode for that.
Definitely. My number eight is Decision to Leave,
Mm.
which we just reviewed. So you can scrub back and listen to our review of that one.
Yep.
Your number seven is probably my favorite documentary
Yep.
of 2022.
Mm.
If I were to make a list of the best documentaries or non-fiction films
Yep.
of 2022, Fire of Love would be my number one.
Yep.
But this comes in at number seven on your overall top 10 list. Why do you love Fire of Love?
Yeah, I think this year for me, like picking the top 10, had to do with a lot of the longevity of it in my mind, right? Like how often do
Mm.
I think about this film after having watched it, or after how long I have watched it. So we caught Fire of Love much earlier in the year, I believe. And it was like your second time going in or your third time going to
Yep,
watch this.
my second time
Your
going
second
in.
time going
Yeah.
to watch this. It was my first time going to watch this. You were raving about it when you came out. The premise itself had already drawn me to the film. I just did not have a chance until after you had watched it itself.
Mm.
Just this, it is a stunning visual spectacle coupled with a real life love story that is moving and sad at the same time, right? We
Yep.
follow volcanology volcano la, 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 volcanologist
Volcanologists. Yep.
Katya and Maurice Craft, and how they're basically their dedication to flying around the planet and chasing volcanic eruptions before it
Mm-hmm.
finally kind of took them. Yeah, their passion
Yep.
took them in an eruption in 1991 in Japan. Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Tragically. Yep.
it is kind of insane, and like we talked extensively about this after watching the film together. It's
Mm.
insane that in a different life they would have been a filmmaker and a photographer, because the footage that they left behind, the photographs that they left behind, all of that
Mm-hmm.
were like works of art in and of itself. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, having Miranda July narrate all of that, and having all of
Mm.
that put together in kind of like a very in depth and intimate look into the life of this couple,
Mm.
uh, and what they loved and their love for
Mm-hmm.
each other was well, deeply deeply impactful.
Yeah.
And yeah, I will remember this film fondly. We caught it early in the year. I still think about it every once in a while, and when people ask me about it, I've got nothing but good things to say about it.
100%. Yeah. Love this documentary. Best of 2022.
Hmm.
Easily. My number seven is a film from Germany
Hmm.
called Great Freedom. This is only available in Singapore via VOD, so I encourage you to check it out. Great Freedom is a moving and tender and bittersweet portrait of an imprisoned gay man
Hmm.
in post World War II Germany. As it turns out, liberation by the Allies does not mean freedom for everyone. We follow our lead character Hans, who is initially freed from
Yeah.
a concentration camp of gays, only to be immediately imprisoned again under paragraph 175, a law criminalizing homosexuality. So yeah, he went from one jail, freed.
Hmm.
The German authorities put him in another jail because homosexuality was outlawed, both in fascist Germany and apparently democratic Germany. Over the course of decades of incarceration, he is locked up, released, has sex with a gay man, locked up again,
Hmm.
blah, blah, blah. This happens over 30 years. He develops an unlikely yet tender bond with a cellmate named Victor, who is a convicted murderer
Hmm.
and quite a homophobe. But they seem to vibe, and their friendship might deepen into something more. I won't spoil it.
Yeah.
This is a contemplative Austrian slash German character study, and it's such an exquisite blend of personal, political, and sensual storytelling, which is why it's number seven on my list. What's your number six, Isa?
My number 6 is Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yep,
If you
yep,
haven't already heard of the now extremely popular film brought to us by the same people who made Swiss Army Men, right?
yeah.
Daniel
The
and Daniel, the
Daniels.
Daniels.
Yep.
Yeah, Everything Everywhere All at Once is probably, it is definitely the best multiverse movie that has come out this year, for
Mm.
sure, and might be the best multiverse movies that we are gonna have for a while. If
Mm-hmm.
if things go as they are going at the moment, right? It's a comedy slash kung fu epic about Michelle Yeoh's character who plays like a depressed laundromat owner
Yep.
that is forced in the responsibility of saving the multiverse is thrust upon her.
Mm.
But that's just like the first layer of it. There's like multiple layers of it, and like if you haven't already watched this film, it would be like a massive spoiler. So I'm not going to go too much detail. We've talked about this on genre equality before. So if you do want a little bit more, and what
Yep.
all three of our reviews for the film was, please go and check out that particular episode of genre equality.
For
But yeah,
sure.
that's my number six. Watched it when it came out. Watched it again when they re-released it.
Mm.
Yeah, and yeah, one of my favorite movies of the year. It just has so many good things about it, and Michelle Yeoh is killing it at the moment. I love her.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. My number six is another film from Iran called Layla's Brothers. It is set in cutthroat and corrupt Tehran, and we follow our lead character Layla as she cares for her elderly parents and for adult brothers. Um, Her family fortunes are in sharp decline. They are dirt poor and broke, and the family is surrounded by wealth and respect that could have been theirs if they made different decisions. So, Layla dreams of starting a family business as a way out of the smothering depths and to avoid spiraling into poverty. However, her very well laid plans are sabotaged, either intentionally or unintentionally, by her self pitying parents, her unreliable band of brothers, and the gendered expectations around Iranian society.
Hmm.
Layla's Brothers delivers a microcosm of patriarchy in Iran with an emotionally charged screenplay that pierces through the veil of oppressive traditions. And in a society ruled by self interest to the extreme, a family member will have no qualms throwing another under the bus just to get ahead. And that's no different for Layla's families, and that's no different for Layla's brothers.
Mhm.
This is one of the best, most intricate, most funny, and most moving family dramas. It is like the poor Muslim version of Succession.
Hmm.
Uh, a lot of it really is like Succession tonally and stylistically.
Yeah.
It's just set in a Muslim country, and these people are poor,
Wow.
but their behavior is very Succession-esque. Yeah, go check this one out once it is released. I'm not sure actually when it's going to be released. This was another one of the films during, of course, a lot has happened in Iran this year.
Hmm.
They have banned this film as well.
Yeah.
It was managed to be snuck out and is showing at film festivals,
Yeah.
but we have no idea how this is going to get a wide release, and hopefully it does one day.
Yeah.
That is my number six. What is your number five?
My number five is a film that we covered in the first half of the year for best films, and it's
Mm,
Come
yep,
On, is in our opinion probably Joaquin Phoenix like best career performance so far. We
definitely.
follow Johnny, who's a journalist, a radio journalist who is embarking on a project to interview children across America about the world's uncertain future. And in the
Mm,
midst of all of that amidst on this really kind of like busy project, his sister turns to him to watch his 8-year-old nephew Jesse,
mm, mm-hmm,
while she tends to her husband, who is suffering from some mental health issues.
yep.
Um, yeah, he agrees, and ultimately Johnny finds himself connecting with his nephews in ways that surprise him, right? Despite the fact that he works with children, all of that.
Mm-hmm,
Eventually taking Jesse on a cross country journey from Los Angeles to New York to New Orleans, and is interspersed with this amazing kind of like interview segments of him interviewing the children and
mm,
all of that. It is a beautiful, very emotionally tender and surprising uh, film,
mm,
especially like given a lot of what people remember of Joaquin Phoenix's previous performance in recent history,
mm-hmm,
as well, not just as the Joker and um, all of that.
yep.
Yeah, I love this film. It is so beautifully captured and so well told. If you want to hear
Definitely.
more about our thoughts about it, please go check out our earlier episode from the earlier half of the year for
Yeah.
the films that we enjoyed for the first 6 months of the year.
Definitely. Yeah. This was one of the highlights from the first 6 months of the year, and it continues to be a highlight once the year is out.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, one of my favorites as well. One of my top 25 films of the year as well. This is next up, my number five
Yeah.
is a film that we've already talked about. It's RRR.
Mm-hmm.
So just tune back to earlier in the episode to hear our lengthy discussion about this Hollywood film
Mm-hmm.
that has basically brought Tollywood out of Bollywood's shadow
Yeah.
for this year at least. In an amazing coincidence, our top four films seem to synchronize. So
Yeah.
let's talk about them one by one.
Yeah.
Our number four is The Fallout by
Mm.
Megan Park.
Mm.
It follows high schooler Veda, played by Jenna Ortega, as she navigates the emotional fallout she experiences in the wake of a school shooting. Relationships with her family, friends, and her view of the world are forever altered. This is another directorial debut, this time by Megan Park,
Mm-hmm.
and it unpacks the tragedy of a school shooting to craft one of the most sensitive and piercing and defining Gen Z films
Yeah.
uh, that's ever been made.
Mm-hmm.
From the gloss of social media to the lasting traumas of the survivors, The Fallout is an unflinching look at a shell-shocked generation of children
Yeah.
and it's grounded in its bravely authentic and very realistic portrait of teen life. This
Mm-hmm.
is not Euphoria.
Yeah.
It is emotional, lively, intelligent, and lyrical. And this film is a gut punch
Yeah.
that you will not ever forget.
Yeah.
Your thoughts about The Fallout?
We love Fallout from the first half of the year. We talked about it in depth in that episode as well.
Yep. Yep.
If you've recently caught Wednesday and think Jenna Ortega has these moments of brilliance in there, but is hampered by a mediocre script and even more
Mm-hmm.
mediocre setting, The Fallout is one of the places where you can watch her absolutely shine together with Maddie Ziegler.
Yep.
It is Euphoria is great in its own way, but The Fallout is critically important,
Mm-hmm.
right? They mean very different things despite certain similarities with the demographic that they're exploring.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jenna Ortega has two films in my top 25 list. If you
Mm-hmm.
go over
Yeah.
to Pop Wire, one of them is X,
Mm-hmm.
one of the best horror films of the year, and one of them is The Fallout,
Yeah.
one of the best dramas of the year. So good year for Jenna Ortega, but of course these two titles pale in comparison to the international success of Wednesday that is breaking all sorts of English language records
Yeah.
that Netflix has had.
Mm-hmm.
So good on her for having a pretty big year, both on the critical side and on the commercial side, I
Yeah.
think.
Absolutely.
So yeah, really good one. And on the genre side too, with X.
Yeah.
Our number three, we've just talked about Happening.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best films of the year coming out front. It's about abortion. So just tune back to listen to our review there. Number two is a film we've also talked about, this time from the first half of the year,
Yep.
where we talked about our favorite films from the first 6 months. It is a Norwegian film called The Worst Person in the World. It stars Norwegian actress Renate Rensby. She is the heart and soul of this touching and inventive account of one millennial life
Oh.
that unfolds over several years in Oslo. Although she is very much not the worst person in the world, her medical student, turned writer, turned artist, and photographer,
Oh.
is the perfect avatar for the uncertainties and confusions of young adulthood, particularly young adulthood as a millennial.
Mm-hmm.
A whole mess of conflicting desires, moments of directionlessness, and emotional rawness that feel endlessly relatable if you're around this age, which I am. Her show-stopping run through a freeze-frame city is possibly the movie moments of the year, and any film that can combine questions of mortality with fun, fully alive scenes of sex and social awkwardness and professional screw-ups and romantic comedy cliches that end up not being cliches.
Yeah.
Uh, ends up being a fun, rich, unique theatrical experience. The Worst Person in the World, possibly the best rom com I've seen in a very long time. What
Yeah.
about you? What do you think about our number two?
I mean, like we've talked about it in detail early in the year.
Yep.
Still, yeah. Worst Person World stands out in my mind. It's not just because like of the catching title, right? Like when you see the title Worst Person in the World, it's like, oh, okay, I'm curious. I'm gonna kind of like check this out. So
Mm-hmm.
many things about the film are relatable, right? And to me, like some of the most memorable scenes that I still can recall to this day is actually the socially awkward way she navigates through like through the new experiences she's getting from her new ambitions, right? And
Yep.
like it's hilariously funny, but at once like has a very deep resonance as well.
Agreed.
Love was personal.
Yep.
It's such an interesting and fun watch. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And our number one, as we have kind of hinted at earlier, is Aftersun.
Mhm.
We've already talked about Aftersun. I think this is 2022's best film.
Yeah.
I think when you watch it, you will agree with me. It's a beautifully oblique debut feature. We've talked about why we love it.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's our number one, Aftersun. For the longest time this year, I watched The Worst Person in the World way back in February. I know the film came out in March
Yeah.
in Singapore.
Yeah.
I caught a press preview in February.
Yeah.
And mid-February, I already decided The Worst Person in the World was probably going to end up being my number one film of the year. I was
Yeah.
so confident in its quality.
Mm-hmm.
And it held on. It held on for such a
Oh
long
my
time.
god, yeah.
Up until December the 3rd, when
Mhm.
Aftersun debuted.
Mhm.
Quite honestly, in the 11th hour, Aftersun took its place. It deserves to take its place.
Yes, absolutely.
But I feel a bit bad for The Worst Person in the World because it basically lost on penalties, like France. It could have been if Aftersun just came out a little bit later.
Yeah.
But what to do? Aftersun is the best. It is here.
Mhm.
But we recommend you check out all of our top 10 recommendations, of
Mhm.
course, from both sides. These are all really great films in a stellar year
Mhm.
for cinema all around the world.
Yeah.
I am actually quite pleasantly pleased that the majority of our top 10
Yeah.
does not come from America.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there
It
are
is
a
in the
bunch that are good,
minority. Yeah, it's in the minority of our top 10.
for sure. From my list, there is only one film from America. That is The Fallout.
Ooh,
From your list, there is
Fallout and
two films from
two films.
America.
Yeah.
Three films. The Fallout, Come On, and Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah, that's right.
Which us Asians have kind of adopted as an Asian film, but it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's an Asian film. You definitely, right? People have been
Definitely,
joking.
yeah.
There's just this upward trend of young Asian filmmakers getting parents to apologize to them in the film.
Yeah. I mean, Turning Red is up there as well. We've
Yeah.
discussed that in genre equality. So
Yeah.
this is a big year for Asian parents saying sorry.
Mhm.
But yeah, that wraps it up for the 59th episode of the Behold podcast. We will be back in January, on January the 1st, as always, to discuss lots in genre equality
Oh,
61.
yeah.
We'll be talking about Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio in much greater detail.
Mhm.
We'll be talking about Avatar 2, Way of the Water, which ended up, I think, being way better than people anticipated. I have not seen it yet, but
Yeah.
we shall see.
Mhm.
The Witcher Blood Origin, I think Hardy will cover that one. I think Isa might also if he watches.
Yeah. I mean, Michelle
But Isa will be very busy with his anime corner
Oh god,
because
there's so much to talk about.
there's so much to talk about. I'll try to help him out there.
Yeah.
Hardy will help him out there as
Yeah.
well. We'll be timing in. Lots to talk about. Nothing much to write home about in quick hits. A couple of solid titles, but
Mhm.
nothing really great.
Mhm.
Hardy wants to end the episode by talking about
Oh.
the overhaul in the DCEU, which, in fairness to Hardy, I mean, I don't like the DCEU, but this is a major turning point, at least in the film industry,
Yeah.
in the Warner Brothers film industry, because so much is happening, so
Yeah.
much controversy is surrounding this,
Mhm.
and we'll let Hardy break it down for us because he is, I think, mostly worried about what The Rock is going to do. But okay,
Yeah.
yeah. I guess Henry Cavill too, lah. But Henry Cavill being, spoiler alert, fired as Superman,
Yeah.
gives him a chance to work on his passion project, which is Warhammer 40K.
Which we know Hardy loves.
Which you know Hardy loves too, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, don't be sad that he's no longer the Witcher. Don't be sad that he's no longer Superman.
Yeah.
The guy is making a Warhammer 40K show that he's writing, directing, and starring in. So hey, good for him, man. He's gonna need all the time in the world to do
Yeah,
that one.
absolutely.
So I'm glad that he has free time finally. So yeah. This has been a good year for film and TV. We'll be back in January. We will be taking a bit of a break in January on the Behold side. There won't be any Behold episodes in January, but we will
Yep.
be back in February for that one. Gotta take a little break.
Yep.
Till next time, guys. Happy New Year. This has been Hitzir.
I'm Isa.
Goodbye, guys.
Ciao.